Okay, so you want to own a ski resort. Powder days, a lodge with a roaring fireplace, your name on the trail map, a gondola gliding up through the pines while your guests sip cocoa and admire the view you built. That's the picture. That's the dream every skier has had at least once. Standing at the top of a run, thinking, someone owns all of this and it could be me. Here's what's actually going on underneath that picture. A ski resort is a business that has to build, insure, and staff an entire small city on the side of a mountain, generate the overwhelming majority of its annual revenue in a roughly 4-month window, and do all of it while depending on a single input no amount of money can fully guarantee: the weather. So why do people still want in? Prestige is part of it. There's a particular kind of glamour attached to owning a mountain that doesn't attach to owning, say, a warehouse. There's also genuine, real estate-driven appreciation potential, which we'll get to. And there's the emotional pull of the sport itself. A huge share of ski resort owners are former ski racers, lifelong skiers, or people who fell in love with a specific mountain decades before they had the money to buy it. That's the appeal. Now let's talk about what it costs to actually do this. The first number that catches new buyers off guard isn't the land. It's what has to go on top of it. A functioning ski resort needs, at minimum, chairlifts, and chairlifts are staggeringly expensive pieces of engineering. A basic fixed-grip chairlift can run $2 to $3 million installed. A modern high-speed detachable quad, the kind skiers now expect at any serious resort, typically runs $4 to $8 million, and a top-of-the-line 8-person high-speed lift with heated seats and covers, the kind installed at major resorts like Big Sky, can run well past $20 million for a single lift. Gondolas cost even more. A serious resort doesn't need one lift. It needs several, and each one is a multi-million-dollar capital asset with a lifespan of roughly 30 years if properly maintained, and a maintenance bill that never stops arriving in the meantime. Then there's snow itself, or rather, the machinery required to manufacture it when nature doesn't cooperate. Snowmaking systems, the guns, the pumps, the water and power infrastructure needed to cover a mountain's worth of terrain, can run anywhere from $500,000 for a modest system up to $5 million or more for full mountain coverage. And that's just the capital cost. Running that system, the water, the electricity, the labor to operate it through the night when temperatures finally drop low enough, can add another $100,000 to over $1 million per season, depending on how much of the mountain you need to cover artificially. Add snowcats and groomers, the machines that groom every run every single night regardless of whether anyone skied it that day. A used snowcat runs $100,000 to $150,000. New, expect $250,000 to $500,000 each, and a resort of any real size needs a fleet of them, not just one. Now the operating costs, and this is where the business starts to feel less like tourism and more like industrial infrastructure management. Labor is the largest ongoing cost. A mid-sized resort's labor bill for mountain operations alone, ski patrol, lift operators, ski instructors, groomers, can easily run $2 to $5 million per season. Ski patrol wages run $15 to $30 an hour depending on experience, but the real cost isn't the hourly wage, it's the sheer number of specialized bodies you need on the mountain simultaneously, every single operating day, because lifts legally cannot run without operators and slopes legally cannot stay open without patrol coverage. Energy costs stack on top of that. A resort can spend $500,000 to $3 million a year just on electricity to run lifts, lodges, and snowmaking equipment, and unlike almost any other seasonal business, a huge share of that electricity bill arrives specifically during the coldest, highest demand weeks of the year, when utility rates are often at their peak. And then there's insurance, which in the last decade has become one of the most existential line items on a ski resort's balance sheet. Liability exposure in this industry is severe and long-standing, tracing back to landmark court decisions from the 1970s, and insurance premiums have been climbing steadily for years, with some regions now facing genuine crises in finding coverage at any price. For a resort operator, insurance isn't a background expense anymore. It's a survival issue that can determine whether the mountain opens at all next season. Here's the part almost nobody outside the industry fully appreciates. At some resorts, lift-related costs alone, buying them, running them, maintaining them, can consume close to half of total operating costs. The mountain isn't the product. The machinery that lets people move up and down the mountain efficiently is the product, and it is brutally expensive to keep running. Now let's talk about how the money actually comes in, because the way this industry makes money has fundamentally changed in the last 15 years, and understanding that shift is the single most important thing about modern ski resort economics. For most of the industry's history, resorts sold day tickets. You showed up, you paid, you skied. Revenue was almost entirely weather-dependent and impossible to predict in advance. Then Vail Resorts introduced the Epic Pass, an all-you-can-ski season pass sold months before the season even started, at a steep discount to what a handful of individual day tickets would cost. It was, on paper, a strange move, selling unlimited access for less than the price of a few single days. But the logic was brilliant. Vail wasn't really selling ski days anymore. It was selling advance commitment, locking in massive amounts of cash before a single flake of snow had fallen, shifting the weather risk from the company onto the customer, who had already paid regardless of how the season actually turned out. It worked spectacularly. Today, Vail Resorts takes in more than 65% of its lift ticket revenue from season passes rather than single-day sales, and the company now collects close to $1 billion in pass revenue before the ski season even begins. The pass has become such a dominant force in the industry that Vail and its main rival, Altera's Icon Pass, now function almost like a duopoly, with two competing bundles of mountains fighting for the same base of committed, prepaying skiers. Here's the part that matters if you're the one owning the mountain. A lift ticket, whether purchased as a single day or amortized out of a season pass, is actually less than half of what a typical skier spends on a visit. The rest comes from rentals, lessons, food, lodging, and retail. This is why smartest operators don't think in terms of ticket revenue. They think in terms of total revenue per skier visit, because skier who rents equipment, takes a lesson, buys lunch at base lodge, and grabs a beanie on the way out is worth dramatically more than someone who shows up with their own gear, skis all day on a pass they bought in July, and leaves without spending another dollars. Just like the airline loyalty programs and the ranch land appreciation in other versions of this story, the real wealth in ski resort ownership often isn't generated by the skiing at all. It's generated by real estate. A mountain that draws consistent visitation becomes an anchor for base area development, condos, hotels, private residence clubs, and second home communities built specifically around proximity to the lifts. This is why major operators run a formal real estate segment alongside their mountain operations, developing and selling property adjacent to the resort and capturing a second, entirely separate revenue stream from the exact same asset, the mountain, that's already generating ticket and pass revenue. Real estate earnings at large resort companies can swing dramatically year to year, but in strong years, they've contributed tens of millions of dollars in profit on top of the core mountain business, essentially monetizing the same view twice, once through a lift ticket and once through a property deed. Now for the volatility, and in this industry, volatility has a very specific, very literal name: snow. Low snowfall seasons or shortened seasons can reduce a resort's overall revenue by 20 to 50% or more in a single year, and unlike almost every other input in this business, you cannot hedge it, insure around it completely, or manufacture your way out of it entirely once temperatures rise past a certain threshold, because snowmaking still requires cold air to work. Wisconsin's Whitecap Mountains Resort is the clearest recent example of what happens when the weather simply doesn't show up. During the 2022-23 season, the resort saw 260 inches of snowfall and pulled in about $1.4 million in revenue. The very next season, snowfall collapsed to under 30 inches. Revenue plummeted 86%, down to roughly $197,000. The resort filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy in late 2025, not because of a single bad business decision, but because an entire year's worth of fixed costs, lift operations, insurance, staffing, still had to be paid against a fraction of the expected income. It isn't only happening in the American Midwest. In Switzerland in 2026, the operators of Braunwald, a small alpine resort, announced they would discontinue traditional downhill skiing entirely going forward, stating plainly that after years of unreliable snow and inconsistent visitation, quote, "business as usual is no longer possible." This is one of a growing number of lower elevation resorts across the Alps and North America quietly concluding that the traditional single mountain, snow-dependent ski business no longer pencils out at the scale they're operating. This is also the deeper structural reason the industry has consolidated so aggressively around companies like Vail and Altera. A single independent mountain has all of its revenue tied to the weather in one specific place. A portfolio of dozens of mountains spread across different states, different countries, even different hemispheres, means that when one region has a terrible snow year, another region often has a great one, smoothing out the volatility that destroys standalone operators like Whitecap. Geographic diversification isn't a nice-to-have for a company running 40 resorts. It's the entire risk management strategy. Let's run this honestly, the way you'd have to if you were the one signing the checks. The optimistic case. You own a well-located resort with reliable elevation and consistent natural snowfall, backed by a strong season pass program that locks in the bulk of your revenue months before opening day, insulating you from a single bad snow year. Your real estate around the base area appreciates steadily, throwing off a second stream of profit entirely separate from lift tickets. Ancillary spending, food, lessons, rentals, lodging, consistently outpaces your lift revenue per guest, and your insurance and lift maintenance costs stay predictable because you're investing steadily in upgrades rather than deferring them. In this world, a ski resort is one of the rare businesses that gets more valuable every year, almost independent of how many people actually ski there, because the land underneath the lifts keeps compounding. The realistic case. A warm winter arrives, the kind climate researchers say are becoming more frequent at lower elevations. Natural snowfall drops well below normal, and your snowmaking system, expensive as it was to build, still can't manufacture snow fast enough once temperatures won't cooperate. Season pass revenue already spent on last year's capital upgrades doesn't refund itself, but this year's day ticket and ancillary revenue, the part that actually depends on people showing up, collapses. Insurance premiums, already rising industry-wide, jump again at renewal. You're now covering the same fixed lift, labor, and insurance costs against a fraction of a normal season's cash flow. The exact position Whitecap Mountains was in the year its revenue fell 86% almost overnight. The difference between those two outcomes isn't a rounding error. It's the difference between a mountain that compounds in value for generations and one that files for Chapter 11 protection during a single disappointing winter. And the entire industry sits on that knife's edge more than almost any other business in this series because unlike a casino's house edge or an airline's yield management algorithm, a ski resort's core product is manufactured, in the end, by the atmosphere, and the atmosphere does not honor a business plan. So if you still want to own a ski resort, understand what you're actually buying. You're not buying a mountain full of snow. You're buying a capital-intensive real estate and hospitality operation that happens to rent access to a view for 4 months a year, wrapped around a machine, the lift system, that costs a fortune to build and never stops needing money. The snow was always the least reliable part of the business. The land underneath it was the actual asset all along.